What is up, everybody? Happy Friday. We're talking with Morgan Thomas, a Clemson fan, on the show to talk about Georgia. We'll make sense of why that's happening and what he has to say about the Bulldogs and what we might learn about Clemson. Maybe Georgia will see Clemson at some point later this year. Maybe they won't. All that and more today on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. I am Daniel, joined today by Morgan Thomas, Clemson fan, covers Clemson, got a show on YouTube, Morgan Thomas Show. Morgan, thanks for jumping on. Happy to have you. Excited to chat tonight.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it. Obviously, thank you for the opportunity to be on the defending national champion podcast for sure.
Yeah, we did win the national championship of podcasts, so I appreciate you recognizing that. Also, Georgia's pretty good as well, but we definitively are the elite of the elite. You got the Braves gear there in the background. You're obviously in Braves country. I assume you're coming to us from South Carolina.
Yeah, definitely. I live here in Simpsonville, right below Greenville. Born in Anderson, so not too right off of 85. Basically, you can find me if you just go down 85.
All right, well, want to give you a chance at the end of the show to plug all of your stuff. Want to make sure our people go and check you out. But let's jump into the reason you're on the show is because you've been kind of combing through college football rosters and putting together some thoughts and some ratings, some numbers, whatever you want to call it, to each roster, and happened to catch my eye the Georgia roster that you broke down. The starting depth chart, and so let's jump into this. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. If you're watching on YouTube, by the way, audio, Spotify, Stitcher podcast, thanks for wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for subscribing. Also, check out the YouTube channel so you can see these ratings, which I'll put up on the screen now. Morgan, talk to me about this offense. There's a couple of these numbers that stand out to me, but I want to withhold my opinion, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on why you assigned some of these scores. Maybe just real quickly, tell me what this score is, what it's a representative of, and then tell me what led to some of these numbers on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, first of all, I was walking the dog a couple of nights ago, and I listened to your podcast, and I thought, wow, this is great information, and I love your podcast because, for an outsider like me, I get to know a little bit, just 25 minutes of what Georgia's latest topics are. So it gives me an idea. That. And then as I was listening to it, I thought, well, I don't really know a ton about the Georgia roster other than those guys that Clemson was in contention for as well in the recruiting trail that, the Bulldogs beat Clemson out for almost every one of them, it seems like, except for Sammy Brown. So I got to brag on that one. But, we got to win one here. But if you look at the score is really just like, whose line is it anyways? It's literally meaningless. I just put together 1 to 10, what I thought, how confident I would be if I was a fan for that player based on what I read about them and their accolades so far. Now, they may be a really highly rated recruit, but I kind of didn't help them out too much in that case because I think, you know what? I want them to prove it to me. So it was more of a like, if I was a fan of your team, how confident would I be in that player?
Got it. Okay, so obviously you got Brock Bowers, 10 out of 10. There's really no need to discuss it. Everybody who's ever seen a college football game has Brock Bowers, 10 out of 10. There's no argument from me on there. I actually like some of these other numbers. I think are spot on. I like that Dominic Lovett, Lad McConkey, that wide receiver combo, which I think most Georgia fans would agree will probably be the two most productive receivers on the team. You've got them both rated pretty highly. Talk to me about a couple things stand out to me. Let's start with Carson Beck, 5 out of 10. Well, the lowest, tied for the lowest rated player on the offense. Obviously, we haven't seen a ton of action from Carson Beck in meaningful snaps in meaningful games. Do you not like some of the things that you've seen out of Carson Beck, or is it more just a case of you can't get any higher than 5 if you haven't played?
Yeah, it was really more of that. Just I really haven't seen a ton of him in person. I haven't seen a ton of him on national television yet. I know what my Georgia friends have been telling me, and my family members that are big Georgia fans and graduates. They're telling me, hey, he's going to be fine. He's going to get in there. Obviously, he came in last season and had a couple of opportunities to show what he could do, and was actually pretty successful. So, but I mean, who would have thought Stetson Bennett turned out to what he would be and was so great. I mean, what a great Disney story, right? And
Sure.
And it's going to be some big shoes to fill now, because he's become this guy that you want to build a statue for, just how awesome his story has been. So, it's big shoes to fill, and you can't always just guarantee that you can just, reload at the quarterback position, because as we've seen with Clemson, you get another 5-star coming in, and you never really know how they're going to respond to that stress and anxiety and to the speed of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Georgia fans have seen Carson Beck play really well in spring games. They've seen flashes from him, but I think it is a big question mark. A guy that I don't think any Georgia fan has question marks about. And if you're looking at this ratings and you're a Georgia fan, I know that you're screaming at the screen for me to go ahead and get to it. You've got Amarius Mims rated as lowly as any player on this list, and I think there are many Georgia fans who would tell you that Amarius Mims might be the most talented player other than Brock Bowers on the entire offense, like in terms of just dominance at his position. Georgia's obviously had a run of great offensive linemen in years past. Too many to name, really, but Amarius Mims seems like could be that guy, and really did play a lot last year as he was not a starter very often, but played quite a bit with injuries and rotation on the offensive line. I think Amarius Mims is rated way too low. If I had one real bone to pick with this list, I would say Amarius Mims should be more like an 8 or a 9, even though he hasn't necessarily proven it on the field.
Wow. Okay. Well, coming from a Georgia fan, being that confident, I mean, that speaks volumes. So that right side, that right tackle position, I mean, my first question is, if he's that great, what's holding him back from being left tackle? But my second thing is, I might have been a little bit, upset about losing out on him in the recruiting trail. So I may have knocked him down a little bit for not picking Clemson.
It's good to own those feelings, Morgan. This is a safe place. You could let us know. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Now, you mentioned left tackle, right tackle. I honestly think the coaching staff just likes him more over there on that side. They also really like what they have in this kid or in a screen. It's still up in the air. This depth chart, your depth chart is my opinion of what the opening day depth chart will be. But Kirby's obviously not going to come out and say who's going to be the left tackle, right tackle. And I think there's a chance you could see Mims play left tackle, but he played a lot of right last year just because, you had Broderick Jones, obviously, who was the uber talented left tackle last year for Georgia. There was no getting in over there. And so most of Mims's reps were on the right side, behind Warren McClendon, or kind of coming in to spell Warren McClendon pretty often. And so I think they just like what they've got with him over there, and then a combination of liking on a screen. But I think you could see him bounce around to either of those tackle spots. Georgia's pretty fluid on the offensive line in that way. All right, I want to get to the defensive side of the ball, and then I want to ask Morgan about Clemson's roster. We got a bunch more to cover, but first, this. let's talk about LinkedIn. If you are out looking for new candidates, new potential hires to fill your small business, it can feel like a bit of a crapshoot. That's why you've got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. If you've got a position that needs to be filled, if you've got recently had turnover in your organization, if you are expanding and growing and need to add to your team, then go to LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn Jobs. My mic was muted.
Oh, there
Now
you
I'm
go.
back.
Yeah. Okay.
Here I am. Morgan, let's transition to the defensive side of the ball. Let's talk about your rankings here. Again, you've got one guy at a 10 out of 10 on this list, and I think it's actually fascinating to me who it is. And so, what is it about Malachi Starks that you are so high on, that you like? Now, don't get me wrong, I think Malachi Starks is a tremendous player. I'm very excited that he plays for my team, but you like him that much, you believe he's the premier player on this defense.
Well, I did have a goal of just trying to make sure to only. Oh, sorry, we got some feedback here.
No, hang on. Yeah, let me figure you out. All right, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, that's better, I think.
You good now?
Go ahead. Yeah, we're good. We're a real professional show. Back-to-back national championship podcasts, Morgan.
Yes.
As you,
Yeah.
if you know any producers of shows that want to work for free, we've recently fired our intern executive producer, and so we're looking for a new qualified candidate.
Well,
Let us know.
I'm always like taking on extra free jobs, but
Hey, that's what I like to hear.
and I'm the same way, man. When it comes to technology, I feel like I'm pretty good, but I always have problems when I do my podcast. It just happens. It happens every time. Murphy's law. But
Exactly. All
Malachi,
right, Malachi Starks.
yeah, Malachi Starks, obviously, a big time recruit. Under Armour All-American guy, 5-star prospect. I mean, finalist for the Freshman of the Year. Started in I think like almost every game. So there what's not to like about the man. So I tried to only pick 110. Now, to
Okay.
be honest with you, with Georgia, you could probably pick more than 110 on the roster. Let's be honest. I mean, the Georgia defensive roster is probably worth a few tens in there. You could give it to maybe Mondon, who's another one that Clemson lost out on, or Jalen Walker, who's one that Clemson lost out on. Dumas Johnson. I mean, the linebackers there, I feel like, even though they're replacing a lot of really good guys, they proved that they could very, very easily rise to that standard. Now, I know Kirby Smart's been kind of beating them up about not, being complacent and not really taking practice seriously or the spring seriously. But I feel like when football season comes around, and it's very close now, that linebacker group is going to be amazing yet again. So I could put one of those guys up there as well. But the linebackers, the secondary looks great. I just don't want to blow you up too much.
No,
give you all
yeah,
tens.
that's smart. It's smart to try to keep the egos in check. If you look for weak points on this defense, now obviously Georgia's had all-world defenses 2 years in a row. Big reason that they're back-to-back national champions, as we've mentioned. So, Clint and I, just to let you in on what we think in case you're new to the show, Clint and I think that this year's defense is going to be better than last year's defense. Take significant steps forward. A lot of it has to do with players that you mentioned already. Georgia returns Dumas Johnson, returns Smile Monda, and returns a lot of talent in the linebacking core, a lot of talent in the secondary, and guys like Kamari Laster and Malachi Starks. If you're looking for weak points, though, Morgan, in this defense, you've got a bit of a weak point on the defensive front, but a bit of a weak point on the defensive line, and then a couple guys in the secondary, particularly that second cornerback spot. Those are the spots that if you're a fan of a rival school, like, say, Clemson, those are the spots that you're hoping, if you play Georgia, to exploit. Is that what you're getting at?
That's how I'm feeling. I mean, I still feel like these guys are great. They just had to wait their time. You know, when you're evaluating a team that can recruit like this, it's difficult not to give them great grades for sure. But what they have proven so far, I felt bad about Stackhouse. I mean, obviously 15-game starter, but he doesn't really scare me. So I don't. That's kind of why I didn't give him a huge rating there. I will say Dalen Everett originally committed to Clemson. In his commitment video, he used my voice, and then he decommitted. Ooh. So I was a little bit, I'm a little bit upset.
Sour grapes that. Again.
Yeah, a little sour there.
Marius Mims and Dalen Everett.
There's history there.
It's personal.
He obviously doesn't know because some media group just made the video for him, of course. But
right.
I do videos on the highlights of recruits that Clemson's going after and looking at their huddle video. And, they usually pull from that about me bragging about them because I try to be positive with these high school kids and pump them up, give them a spotlight. But, yeah, Dalen Everett, great high school player. Depending on how you feel about IMG, though, it's give or take. Some people don't always like the IMG guys. Obviously, after Brent Venables left, they lost a couple of guys, Everett being one of those. So I'm curious to see what happens with him, where he fits in this year. This is his time to show what he can do at the next level. But I gave him a 5 just because I'm not really sure how sold I am on him. Can he make that potential? Would I be excited about him at Clemson? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the big one to me, I had a real problem with Marius Mims on the offensive side of the ball. And I got a real problem with Michael Williams on the defensive side of the ball. Michael Williams is my 10 out of 10. If I'm only allowed to give 110 on the defense, it's Michael Williams. I think he proved himself to be a force in the college football playoff last year as a true freshman. Elite pass rushing skills, something that Georgia has really lacked. If they've lacked anything in the last few years, it has maybe been a pass rusher of his caliber. They've had guys like Nolan Smith who are not true pass rushers, guys like Trayvon Walker, obviously elite talents, but not a true edge pass rusher. Michael Williams is that. I think he's the best one that's been at Georgia in quite some time, and so that's the guy that I would for sure, I think a lot of Georgia fans would agree. But no argument on Malachi Starks. I think Jamon Dumas Johnson, those are the elite players on every level. So if I'm going to give out 10 out of 10s for each level of the defense, I think those are the guys. And I think for the most part, you felt the same. All right, I want to talk to Morgan about Clemson. Georgia might see Clemson this year. Let's see if Morgan thinks that Georgia might play Clemson this year. Find out what the Tigers have, what they're going to do, new offensive coordinator, and all that right after this. But first, let's talk about eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit, making sure you have a 10 out of 10 on the Morgan scale for every single player. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to be just the right fit. So next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need is going to fit right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check mark to know with confidence that your part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time at all. It's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts and the right fit at the right prices on ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible term items only, exclusions apply. ebaymotors.com. All right, Morgan, finally, you can relax. You can take a deep breath. You don't have to talk about players that you have only thought about casually or a little bit. Let's talk about Clemson. You have a lot of family and friends you mentioned that are Georgia fans. I have a lot of family and friends that are Clemson fans. It's two major brands in the southeast of college football, obviously. And I will just tell you what my Clemson friends have told me, and see if you agree or disagree. We'll start the conversation there. A lot of the Clemson friends that I have are nervous about this Clemson team. And none of it has to do with the quarterback. They're all sold on Cade Klubnik, but they're still nervous that this Clemson team, particularly on offense and particularly in the trenches on both sides of the ball, doesn't have what the championship teams of Clemson past have had. So your thoughts on that? Are you sold on Clemson as a championship contender? And if so, why? And if not, what makes you pause?
Well, I think I'm not fully sold on that they can make it to the college football playoffs in a scenario where it's just 4 teams, this being that last year. Do they have that opportunity? Yes. Is the schedule, available for them to do that? Yes. And run the table? I think so. But things have to work out that haven't worked out in a couple of years. And the first thing being, with Garrett Riley here now, there's a lot of excitement and anticipation on what he's going to do and what he did at SMU and what he did at TCU. But there's still that lingering thought that, well, you remember the Georgia game when they had to play like a legit team and they really didn't do much. Now that happened, but the other games also did happen.
Sure.
And there is also a scenario with Clemson fans that says, hey, this roster is much better than anything TCU had at that time. And this roster just in a few years ago was able to hold their own in Charlotte against Georgia. And I think that Clemson always fields a defense, and they have a defense this year that is a championship level defense. Maybe not as deep as it used to be. The defensive ends are, outside of the first string, a bunch of guys that have not played at all. The defensive tackles are very stacked. The linebackers, though, the linebackers in Barrett Carter and Jeremiah Trotter Jr., first round draft picks,
Absolutely.
I think. But after that, unknown. So there are definitely some depth issues there on the defense. But do they have, as far as their first string championship level? Yes. But then you talk about the offense. Well, you have Garrett Riley. You have this excitement. You have Cade Klubnik, Elite 11, Gatorade Player of the Year in Texas. You have Phil Maffa and Will Shipley, guys that could be starting running backs on a lot of teams in the Power 5. But then what about the wide receivers?
That's the question for me. That's the huge question for Clemson for me.
And what about the offensive line? 1 minute Dabo will say, hey, if I went to bed tonight and I had this player as my left tackle, I would be sleeping pretty. And then the next minute he says, well, we really have like 10 guys we could rotate. I don't want this 10 guys we can rotate thing.
No, not on the offensive line.
I want solid guys that have earned their spot. And unfortunately, Clemson is still working through some guys who are redshirt juniors taking up scholarships that have not seen a lot of time and have not seemed to be able to develop into players that you can trust. So what's happening is freshmen and redshirt freshmen are having to jump redshirt juniors because they didn't pan out or they still haven't figured it out. So there's still a lot of unknowns there on the offensive line. And again, the wide receivers, you have Garrett Riley, but you still have those wide receivers. And it's a toss up there. Was it DJ Uiagalelei's problem that he caused and the wide receivers are actually good? Or is it, wait a minute, they actually aren't that good either? So there's still a big question mark there.
Yeah, and I don't know how you feel about it from an inside perspective. From an outside perspective, I've always thought that, rightfully so, when people talk about the championship Clemson teams, they always talk about two things. They always talk about the starting quarterback, and they always talk about the defensive line. And rightfully so, because on every championship team that Clemson's had, they have had an all-world starting quarterback, and they've had an all-world defensive line. But there's also been a third thing that's been common to every Clemson championship team that they've had, and it has been absolute dudes on the outside to go and catch the ball. Trevor Lawrence was great, but it's not like he was out there throwing it to you and me. Deshaun Watson was great, but it's not like he didn't have first-round talent, NFL caliber wide receivers that he was throwing the ball to. That's the thing for me. To be honest, I have Clemson in the college football playoff. I am not buying Florida State at all. And I think North Carolina is probably the next biggest threat in the ACC to Clemson, and I just don't buy the overall team talent disparity there between those two programs. I think it favors Clemson drastically. So I do have Clemson going, at worst, I think 11-1, and probably at 11-1, you see Clemson in the college football playoff. Who knows? Like you said, with four teams, you could go 11-1 and miss the college football playoff, or I guess 12-1 after you win the championship game. You could do that and miss the college football playoff. But I do have Clemson in. But if I'm gonna have a concern and I'm a Clemson fan, it's those wide receivers, because even you mentioned Garrett Riley, and you look at that TCU team last year. It's the first-round wide receiver is on that team, and that's that carried the offense at times for that TCU team. Now, it's a deeper talent pool that you mentioned at Clemson than it was at TCU, but does it have that top-end talent on the outside? That's the question.
Yeah, outside wide receiver still a big question mark even this year as well. So they've got to figure out who's going to be that guy, and is Garrett Riley's offense really going to propel them to that next level? Were they recruited highly? Yes, these guys really, the roster's not made up of 2 stars anymore. Clemson used to be that way. Now Clemson has mostly 4 stars and sprinkle in some 5 stars here and there, but they don't have it at wide receiver. Like you said, the Mike Williams are not there. The T Higgins not there. Those guys, they miss a ton. And they don't have it this year, but maybe Garrett Riley knows how to scheme and use routes with each other to get guys open. Cause that was the big struggle, is they just lost their physicality. There was none of this, pushing off a little bit. There was none of this like getting open in your route. It was just every time the ball was snapped, it seemed like everybody was covered every single play. And watching it from the stands, I finally just screamed, like, why don't you just push? Like, let the referee call it. Make them make the call. But
yeah, Am I back?
Yeah.
Did you get me back?
Yeah, you're good.
I'm back. This microphone, I swear. All right, Morgan. Before I cut out again, tell the people where they can find you. If they want to learn about this Clemson team, if they want to just get their college football fix and hear more college football talk, where can the people go to find the stuff that you're putting out?
Well, I made it easy. It's just my name, at the Morgan T Show over on Twitter, and at the Morgan T Show over on YouTube as well. The Morgan Thomas Show, all things Clemson, if you're interested.
All right, great. Morgan, thanks so much for being here. Enjoyed having you. We will be back next week with lots more Georgia stuff to cover. Go check out Morgan over on Twitter and his YouTube show, and we will see you guys next time.